Welcome to our webinar. We're here to discuss some really important findings from an intervention that we think has real potential to have, a really important impact on mental health outcomes for children and young people at an age where we really begin to see those problems escalating. So we're really excited to talk to you about that. We have got a lot to get through today, but I'd just like to pause and ask our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Irene, Sclare, clinical psychologist, and I developed the Discover intervention.
Hi, I'm Stephen Lisk. I'm the trial manager for the BESST trial.
Hello, I'm June Brown. I'm the chief investigator for the BESST trial.
Everyone, Ben Carter, Professor of Medical Statistics and the Senior Statistician of the BESST trial.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Holloway, Programme Director for the King's Multi-Partnership for Children and Young People.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Shand. I'm a researcher at UCL and co-leading the forward implementation of Discover.
Hi, I'm Peter Fonagy, Head of the Division of Psychology and Language Sciences at UCL, and I'm also Senior Clinical Advisor at NHS England, Children and Young People's team.
And I'm Jess Deighton. I'm going to be your chair for today. I'm Professor of Child Mental Health and Wellbeing at UCL and Director of Applied Research and Evaluation at Anna Freud. I'm aware we're going to be talking about a range of terms today, so I thought before I set the scene a bit, I will just perhaps mention a few terms just to get to land those before we move into the talks. You will hear us talk about Discover today. Discover is the intervention that was involved in the research and has been developed as a CBT-based workshop for young people at the upper end of secondary school. BEST is the trial in which Discover was tested across a range of schools. And we will talk a lot also about mental health support teams, or MHSTs. And they are, for those who don't know, those are teams that are based within child and adolescent mental health services, but have a specific remit to work directly with schools. And they were involved in delivering the workshops and allied activity around Discover within the schools in the trial. So hopefully those terms will become familiar as we go. I just want to do a little bit more scene setting, just to say, as many of you will be aware, we've seen a real uptick in mental health problems in children and young people in recent years. Those who've been used to talking about prevalence for a while used to talk about 1 in 10 young people experiencing mental health problems. Now we're talking much more about something like 1 in 5. And when we look at the 16 to 19 age range, it's really more like 1 in 4. So a lot of the challenge is really concentrated in this later adolescent period. And there's been increasing focus on schools as a context that provides a lot of opportunity to step in and give support to young people for a number of reasons. One is that it's kind of universal access point really for children and young people. They spend a lot of their time there, but also because we know from other research that when we ask young people about who they talk to about their mental health challenges, they do tend to seek support within the school context. So it makes sense to put the help in the settings where they look for it. The third is that from the evidence, we can see that there's good evidence that school-based interventions can be effective for children and young people. But there's a caveat around that, there's a big but, and that is what you do in this space really matters. So what we know from the research literature is that there's a sort of overall good impact, but we find most impact or greater impact, if you like, in interventions that tend to be CBT-based, that tend to be delivered by clinicians as opposed to by teachers themselves, and that interventions that are delivered in a secondary school context tend to be slightly more effective than those in primary. We also know that implementation hugely matters, and a lot of why implementation falls down in some interventions is because there hasn't been enough consideration given between the fit of the intervention and the school, and how the school environment can facilitate and deliver well successful intervention. Another is around sustainability. We massively lose the impact potentially that we can have with intervention if we don't think about the longer term and how these things can be rolled out year in, year out. And we know again that if there are significant challenges for a school in rolling these things out or facilitating them, then that sustainability won't happen. I think Discover plays a really important role in addressing some of these challenges and opportunities in a school context. It really meets the brief, I think. So first of all, it does have CBT principles at its heart. It is based in a secondary school context, and it does use mental health support teams that are already embedded in local areas to provide clinical expertise to deliver the intervention, and more potential for sustainability. It also is based on the needs and preferences of schools, so it's a good fit to that environment. And I am no expert on Discover as much as the next person who's going to speak, so I'm going to leave it to Irene to tell us more about Discover and how it looks in the school context. Over to you, Irene.
Thanks, Jess. Good afternoon, everybody. I run the Discover team at South London and Maudsley NHS Trust, and I was a clinical lead for the BEST trial. And within BEST, I trained and supervised all the MHST staff to deliver Discover in their schools in the 4 regions. I created Discover as a service innovation around 12 years ago, having been inspired by June Brown's workshop model for adults, especially the features of accessibility and the self-referral approach. Discover is a manualised programme for 16 to 18s for those who experience anxiety, high stress, low mood, but who find it hard to access psychological help at this challenging life stage. Since setting up Discover in 2012, my team and I have seen and treated over 6,000 young people in school sixth forms in the London area. We see around 250 sixth formers per year, around 45% of whom have complex and long-standing problems. So just very quickly show you a photo of our team at a rare, relaxing lunch together, and then I'll move on to the next slide. And I'm going to just speak to those items there. Firstly, Discover was co-designed with groups of teenage advisors from local sixth forms. This was a very innovative way of working with young people to think about a programme that they saw as helpful and useful. The programme we've got is still reviewed regularly with young people to ensure it stays relevant to 16 to 18s and also takes on new good ideas. Discover is designed to address real-life teenage problems, both personal and academic, and we offer techniques which improve young people's resilience, their ability to cope with difficulties. And in line with June's approach, we're careful to use non-stigmatizing language that normalizes the experience of anxiety and low mood. For example, our program is called How to Manage Stress and Worry. Our self-referral method is designed to address known service inequalities and make Discover accessible to a wide range of teenage needs and interests. A high proportion of young people who attend Discover have never come forward for help before, despite their needs. As Jess has already said, the workshop content draws on CBT theory and updated and latest psychological research, and we include interactive tasks and motivational elements throughout the day. We see young people additionally individually before and after the workshop day to support their engagement. Important to say that many complex problems and risks have been hidden from adults or normalised by young people, and these can get safely explored and addressed in one-to-ones. And finally, important to say that we work closely with teachers to maintain young people's progress. And quickly to the next slide, which I'll just show for a second. Thank you. This slide shows the call-out leaflet, again developed with young people, that we hand out to all students at school assembly to encourage awareness of the programme and increase the widest kind of uptake. And as you can see, young people have told us they want to know, what is it going to do for me? So you'll see those bullet points there about how it might help someone if they decide to come along. And the next slide shows the various stages of the Discover programme. I won't go into all of these, but you can see that the workshop day is embedded in a whole set of other steps and stages designed to get everybody involved and keep people engaged. We're going to move on now to give an overview of the workshop day itself. We start the day by giving students scientific and psychological ways of understanding stress and worry and its effects on their thoughts, feelings, body sensations and behaviour. And then we teach them as dynamically as possible a set of CBT-informed techniques and help them practice how to apply these in their lives. It's a busy day, So we also provide snacks and group activities to keep energies up. We've got very used to all sorts of icebreakers that we use as well. The next slide shows the various CBT techniques that we offer as a kind of toolkit. These are the techniques that students are helped to practice during the day. They include third wave CBT approaches such as mindfulness and some aspects of compassion-focused therapy, and those are primarily to manage troubled thinking, techniques that can calm body and brain responses, and tips to tackle unhelpful behaviours, such as the very common problem of procrastination. And in the next slide, you'll just see a glimpse, really, of something that was very special to us, creating 4 video characters, and they act as peer role models. These get very positive feedback from people at the workshop. Each character, carefully designed, describes their life problems and how these affect them. The screen's probably not large enough for you to see the detail there, but they each reflect also at the end of the workshop about how they made changes and how Discover has helped them. And in the next slide, very briefly, you'll see a way in which we use the characters to demonstrate various techniques and to trigger group discussion and practice. Here in this just tiny photograph, you'll see Nathan and Sammy, 2 characters. Nathan uses thought challenging to help Sammy deal with an upsetting experience where Sammy thought that some boys were laughing at him. Just nearly at the end here, I'm going to show the next slide where we review everyone's chosen Discover goal by phone about a week after the workshop. This is to check on progress and boost motivation. I thought you might be interested to see out of the whole kind of smorgasbord of techniques that we offer young people for them to choose. Most commonly selected goals are those relating to managing academic stresses, for example, getting organised, stopping procrastinating. Very importantly, improving sleep and getting a better work-life balance, and better ways to handle worry and panic. And finally, the last quick slide is just a little outline of the Discover app. And this was developed at young people's request and co-developed and produced with young people. We provide a lot of material during the workshop day, and this ends with everyone setting their personal Discover goal, and they choose which techniques they think will be most helpful for them. This Discover bot, which we developed a couple of years ago, is designed to help them recall the workshop techniques, and the app also records their chosen goal. And finally, my last slide, I've got a quote here from a recent Discover participant. And obviously we've chosen something rather nice, but really I think my team and I also genuinely feel that we are hopeful that the Discover Workshop programme can reach and help many more young people, and then hopefully across the whole of the UK. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Irene. That's a really helpful insight into the intervention. Next, we're going to have Steve talking to us about how that intervention has been trialled as part of the BEST trial. Steve, do you want to take it from here?
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, so I'm going to introduce you to our clinical trial, BEST, which stands for Brief Educational Workshops in Secondary Schools trial. And it's a randomized controlled trial in which we evaluated the effectiveness of the Discover programme in reducing depression symptoms in 16 to 18-year-olds. So I just wanted to start by presenting some of the barriers to treatment that exist for adolescents. And I think it just really illustrates that we do require more accessible and effective treatment resources to overcome those barriers and reach young people who require support. And so we felt in this trial that the Discover Workshop programme was a really good candidate as an intervention that can overcome many of these barriers. And therefore we felt it was really important to rigorously evaluate the effectiveness of the programme. And so following some positive results from smaller pilot and feasibility studies, we commenced this larger cluster randomized control trial in 2020. We recruited 57 sixth forms to participate across 4 broad regions of England, as you can see on the map. And we recruited and trained 15 mental health support teams to deliver the workshop. 900 participants were enrolled into the trial. And importantly, consistent with the workshop approach, entry into the trial was through self-referral. So no screening measures were used for eligibility. We wanted to make it as accessible as possible for those who felt they needed this type of support. So approximately 50% of participating schools received the Discover workshop, and around 50% of participating schools received their usual school care alongside some signposting information. And our primary outcome measure for the trial was depression, measured using the MFQ questionnaire. We also collected measures of anxiety, well-being, resilience, sleep quality, and some health economic measures to look at cost effectiveness. And so Irene's obviously already been through the workshop program, but I just wanted to emphasize that the program in the trial was delivered as closely as possible to how it would be delivered in the real world by the SLAM team who developed it. So the students each attended a one-to-one pre-workshop session with one of the delivery practitioners. And then a few days later, they attended the group workshop. So this was delivered by 3 members of the local MHST. It was delivered at school in a private classroom without any other school staff present. It lasted a full day. All the students were provided with workbooks and access to the Discover app, and they were all encouraged to set goals that they could work on following the workshop. And we also measured fidelity at each workshop. So we used self-report measures and observer fidelity measures to ensure that the workshop was delivered consistently across schools and regions. And then in the weeks following the workshop, the students were offered up to 3 follow-up phone calls delivered by their local workshop team to review their progress regarding the goals they'd set in the workshop. And so I just wanted to give you an overview of the full trial process for each of the participants, as I think it will help the results make more sense. So after recruiting the schools, we ran recruitment events that were tried to mirror what Discover would do to recruit students. So that consisted of an assembly and an information session to promote the trial. Then after taking consent, we conducted the baseline assessments, which I just mentioned, with each participating student individually with the research worker. After that point, when we collected all baseline measures, we randomized the schools to either receive the workshop or treatment as usual. And then after arm allocation, students receiving the intervention commenced at 3 stages of the workshop program, and those in the control arm just received their usual school care. Then all participants were invited to complete the assessment questionnaires again at 3 and 6 months in person at school with a blinded research assistant. And then students were contacted again at 12, 18 and 24 months to offer them the chance to complete these assessments again online this time, so that we could understand their progress over a longer period of time, up to 2 years. And just briefly, just to highlight our recruitment numbers. So as I mentioned, we trained 15 MHSTs, we recruited 57 schools, and importantly, we hit our pre-trial target of 900 participants recruited into the trial. And we also saw really strong follow-up rates at 3 and 6 months, with 96 and 95% respectively. So that means we were in a really good position to see meaningful results from the trial, regardless of which direction those results went in. And you can see the numbers are all split by region in that table. And so finally, I just wanted to show you some of the characteristics of the participants who enrolled in the trial. So first of all, you can see 52% were white British, 46% were not white British, with the largest minority groups being Asian and Black. We can also see that 80% of our sample had not previously sought help from their GP for mental health, and 70% had not previously received counselling or talking therapy from any source. So it appears to suggest that although this population wanted to receive help, very few had taken formal routes to acquiring help at that point. And then finally, in terms of gender, we saw that 228 male participants were recruited, which made up 25% of our sample. This isn't as high as we'd hoped in terms of the percentage of male participants. We had worked to try and engage more boys in the trial, but I feel more work is certainly required to reach boys and young men who need help but aren't currently accessing that help. So that is essentially my brief overview, and hopefully that will help set the scene for the results of the trial. So I'll hand over to Jess now.
Thanks so much, Steve. So next we're going to go over to June, who will tell us more about the research findings themselves. Over to you, June.
I'm June Brown, so I'm the Chief Investigator for BEST, and I'm also a reader in clinical psychology. And my main area of work has been really about accessibility. I'm really keen that people can reach interventions that they need. So I'm very pleased to be able to talk about these results. So I'm going to be talking about the results at 6 months follow-up. So on this slide, what this shows is that if we have a self-referral system, not everybody will have serious depression. So 35% showed symptoms of depression, 27% showed anxiety, but significantly enough, 80% were showing lower than average scores for general well-being. So they were saying, well, we're not well, even though they might not have reached the threshold. So these are the results at 6 months. And so Steve talked about how students were reassessed at 6 months, and we compared how they were 6 months after the trial had started. So as you can see on the MFQ, which is our main outcome measure, there was a significant reduction of minus 0.17. And there were other reductions on most of the other measures. There were either reductions in terms of anxiety or increases in well-being and resilience. The only measure that didn't actually show a strong effect was sleep. So this is a graph which maybe shows it a bit more clearly. So this on the left-hand side, the top line is the control group who don't really improve that much in terms of depressive symptoms, but there's a much more significant decline in depressive symptoms for the Discover workshop group. So this is for the whole group, for all the students who self-referred. This is a slide which shows the results for all the people who reach threshold. So, and as you can see, that there is a bigger effect. So let's look at the next slide with the graph, and the figures show that this is a moderate effect size, which is statistically really quite important because it shows if we are actually just looking at results for the people with elevated depressive symptoms, the effect is stronger. So this is the cost effectiveness results. I'm not going to go through this in detail because I can't really explain everything, but basically it shows that the cost effectiveness results were good for the overall group and even better for the subgroup who had increased depression. So that's very promising in terms of where we go next. This is the process evaluation. So there were interviews with 22 students who experienced the intervention, and there was generally a positive response. They particularly valued the normalizing aspect of the group discussions, and they liked the workbooks. For the practitioners, there were 21 practitioners who took part. They liked the workshop activities and materials, but they felt a bit uncomfortable with the scripted delivery, especially if it was the first time. But they expressed positive feelings about the training and the program's potential for broader implementation. So in terms of summary and conclusions, in this large confirmatory trial, we've obtained 95% follow-up rates, which is pretty good, and a very diverse group of students with 48% non-white ethnic groups. In terms of clinical effectiveness, they show a significant but small effect size for everybody, but with this, there's a stronger effect for the subgroup above threshold. The health economic results show cost effectiveness. Results are good for the overall group, but even better for the depressive subgroup. And the process evaluation of students and clinicians also support these findings. So let me hand over back to Jess.
Thanks so much, June. That's great to see that such a good impact, and especially concentrated in the group with more difficulties. Next, we're going to have Ben, who is the senior analyst for the BEST trial, talk about the longer term follow-up. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Jess. So I'm going to be talking about the 2-year outcomes. And so these are preliminary analyses that we've done so far. And as you can see, the follow-up rate within the 3 and 6 months were exceptional. Now, month 12, 18, and 24, we had 76, 72, and 70%. So good follow-up at our longer-term outcomes. Now, looking at the primary outcome, which is depression, and that's measured again with the mood and feelings questionnaire at 2 years. We saw that the effect at month 3 and 6 was about a difference in the two groups of about 2 on the mood and feelings questionnaire scale. And that increased at months 12 and 18 to about a difference between the two groups of about 3. And at month 24, that increased to about 4.5. Now, what that means is at month 24, that's a Cohen's effect of 0.3. Now, that's a small effect, but a small but clinically important effect. And that's important to remember. Of a improvement in symptoms in those that receive the Discover versus the usual care arm. Now, moving over to our secondary outcomes, which is well-being. And at month 24, we saw an effect on the Cohen scale of 0.2, again, statistically significant improvement in well-being in those within the Discover arm compared to those within the control arm. Now, a Cohen's effect of 0.2 is again a small effect. Looking at the sleep conditioning index, which is it's an outcome of sleep, we again found an improvement in sleep. And that's again a small effect within those in the Discover arm. The RCADS, which is the Revised Child's and Adolescent Depression Anxiety Scale, we saw an improvement within those in the Discover arm again, and in resilience within the children and youth resilience measure, we saw a small but clinically important improvement within those that again received the Discover arm. Now, looking at those individuals that June's already highlighted, of those with elevated symptoms of depression at baseline, we looked at those in the short term, but also now in the long term at month 24. And we saw a considerable increase in the effect of an effect size of 0.8. That's a large effect at month 24. Jess, over to you.
Those finds are really just hot off the press, aren't they? So that's great to hear. The talks that we've just been through have been very much focused on the BESST trial, what the process was, what the findings were in the short and long term. The next set of talks will focus a little bit more on what the bigger picture looks like from various different sort of perspectives. And we'll be starting with Sarah Holloway, who's Programme Director for the King's Maudsley Partnership for Children and Young People, who's going to tell us a bit more about the King's Maudsley Partnership.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. As Jess said, I just want to talk very briefly about the King's Maudsley Partnership for Children and Young People, which aims to generate and support many more innovations like Discover, the one you're hearing about this morning. We've established the partnership because we know how much further we can travel and how much more impact we can have if we work across the boundaries between clinical service delivery and academic research. And what you're hearing about today from all these presenters is a great example of collaboration across those boundaries. The Discover product itself, the intervention for children and young people, and the research we now have on its efficacy is the product of collaboration between Irene and June and their wider teams over a number of years. And we believe it has really exciting potential for further scale and spread. So on the slide here, you can see a description of what is the King's Maudsley Partnership for Children and Young People. It's all about clinicians and researchers working more closely together to find new ways to predict, prevent, and treat mental health disorders for children and young people, and then crucially to maximise the translation of that research and that evidence into improved services locally, so where we are in South London, but also nationally and globally. It's a unique partnership supported by the Maudsley charity, some of our philanthropic supporters, and it's between the NHS Foundation Trust, South London and Maudsley, and researchers and academic teams in King's College London, and specifically the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. And the little picture you can see there will be the partnership's new home. So hopefully early spring next year, we will be moving into the Pears Maudsley Centre, which really excitingly will co-locate our clinical and service delivery teams for children and young people's mental health with researchers looking into evidence generation. And even more excitingly, in the lower ground floor of that building, you can see there, we will have a unique clinical research facility for children and young people trying to embed research and evidence generation into many more children's journeys through our services and through the NHS. And the partnership, just my final word before I hand over to the next speaker, the partnership wants to have impact not only in South London, where we deliver a number of services, but as you can see in that diagram there, we've got ambitions to influence and support innovations in children and young people's health, mental health nationally and also internationally. And that's why we are so excited that there is, based on this really promising evidence, plans to research the potential for scale and spread and implementation of this offer, to see what the potential is to embed it, not just in mental health support teams in South London, but also nationally. So that's probably a good point to hand back to our next speaker on implementation and policy implications.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really great to hear about, and a perfect launching off point for Jenny, who's going to speak next about the plans for further implementation around Discover. Jenny, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jess. We've just put our research question on the page, and really it says what next? So we've heard some fantastic results from the trial, from the BESST trial, and how do we take that across to other sites across the nation? And as Sarah said, we've got some questions that we need to answer in order to understand how to continue to deliver Discover outside of a trial environment. And that's what our implementation research hopes to do. So we will be making some changes because business as usual is different from a research trial. Firstly, in who we train and how we train them. So we want to be integrating the training of delivering the Discover intervention into the training of mental health support teams. Secondly, how we recruit schools to participate and how we recruit children to participate. You will see that we had a fantastic trial team with us through the research to date. And going forwards, we want to understand how do we make that part of MHST's roles within the schools that they're working. So they will be recruiting the schools, but also recruiting the students within them. And then thirdly, the changes around our follow-up and outcome measurement. And I think it's fantastic results that June shared around the scale of participation that we had. So 95% participating in those outcome measures, so that we could say with confidence, does Discover lead to improvements in mental well-being? And what we want to do is to be able to continue that measurement so that we understand by implementing Discover in this different environment, can we maintain the outcomes that we saw in the trial? And that's really critical. That's really what we're trying to understand. And so we are integrating the follow-up and outcome measurement process so that children and young people are able to give the data about outcomes through an online data capture tool, and that the teams are able to see each other less in some ways, so that it's more manageable within the week. There are two sites that we're looking at. So one is sustain sites. We don't want to just end all of this great work that's happened in the BEST trial. We want to sustain that and to support those sites to continue to deliver Discover for future cohorts of young people. And then we want to scale it to new sites. And that's where we'll really get into this learning about what does this look like for areas of the country that weren't participating in BEST, but are really excited about building on the legacy that it's left. So we've got 3 scale regions where we will be setting it up and looking at how do you deliver Discover in this environment. So there's some critical learning that we've got to do around how do we implement Discover, but still maintain those fantastic outcomes we've heard about today. We've got further learning to do about inclusion and diversity, and we want to really ensure that we're able to maintain that inclusive access. And as Steve alluded to, the diversity of the cohorts participating is really important and really exciting. So we want to ensure we can do that in business as usual. And thirdly, we want to learn about how do you take an intervention and maintain its quality when it's delivered in different environments. So we'll be looking at measuring the intervention itself, ensuring that it's being consistently delivered across these different regions, but also measuring adherence. So how do we make sure that we continue to have it delivered in the way in which it was anticipated? So I hope that's a really helpful rattle through next steps, but more to come, I think is the headline.
Thanks, Jenny. That's really exciting. And I think that there were some questions I saw coming into the chat before we started the session about what next for sites who were involved before. So hopefully that'll be good news for many people. Great. I'm just going to share my screen again while we pass on to Peter Fonagy, who's going to talk to us about some of the wider policy implications of BEST and its implementation. Peter, I think you still have your full 8 minutes, if that's helpful to know.
It is enormously helpful. Jess, thanks so much, and much appreciated. All the people keeping to time, because I thought I'd be squeezed, but there again, good discipline. It just speaks to the quality of the trial that you have heard about. And I don't really need that slide anymore. I'd like to speak about what are the policy implications. I was representing policy on the trials team. And in answering the question, what are the policy implications? The results, in a way, speak for themselves. They are enormous. They could change the way that we offer, at least at the first triage, the way we have accessible, effective treatment of children and young people's anxiety and depression available at scale. We have established, very fortunately for this country, mental health support teams. And mental health support teams do not exist in other countries. We're pretty unique in that. But that means that we have pretty much what you'd hope to have in a service that actually is struggling with long waiting lists. And if I tell you that, and Jess mentioned this, but the current wait list for children and young people mental health treatment is about 1.4 million who are waiting for their second contact. Then you will know just the size of the problem that we are facing. But what we need to meet this problem are goal-focused approaches that are structured, that are targeting resources early as far as possible, and aiming at those who are most at risk of future difficulties. Who are these people? They know who they are. And that's one of the brilliant parts from a policy point of view of the Discover approach. That is, young people know very well if they do need support, if they do need help. And that is perhaps a compliment to us because we have made them more aware, but to a point where we've created a rod for our own backs, if I may say that, where our capacity to meet that need is perhaps sometimes minimal compared to the need that we have identified. So from a policy point of view, I'd want to make 4 points here. The first is that we want to ensure access. And in this sense, what we have in Discover from the BESST trial clearly ticks a box. We have access, not just the people who are above already a threshold, who perhaps we can help most, but also those who are almost there. And I think more data will reveal that we have actually prevented many of these children and young people from reaching that threshold, which is obviously our goal in these contexts. But secondly, we are offering a structured intervention that can be scaled. And from a policy point of view, that is so important because we see many, many interventions that are effective, but actually they are too complex to scale. And here, a one-day workshop that you have the landing strip of mental health support team being able to provide not just the capacity to implement, but even more important, the background of training that's necessary in order for those workers with fidelity to be able to implement an effective and, as June said, a cost-effective approach. But thirdly, I want to emphasize the involvement of young people in this. And I think we heard from Irene how young people remain involved in the program, because that flexibility fits with the flexibility that we need for young people, because they are not like projects that can be rolled out exactly as they were invented. They change. And I think the continued involvement in the evolution of the workshops as these continue to meet young people's needs, as they will, speaks really to the important priority within policy to hearing young people's voices and hearing patients' voices more generally. And then finally, some of the, at the moment, perhaps weaker results from the trial, but nevertheless enormously important ones in terms of how anxiety, depression, particularly depression, is signaled early on. You heard how quality of life, but also sleep improvement actually benefits from this intervention. And I think the more we understand about the development of depression as a clinical problem, the more we know that these early indications, interventions at these early stages are really absolutely critical in achieving prevention. Prevention, I believe, in mental health is the future, and it certainly has not been our past. Prevention at the level of the school has the highest return on investment and the longest sustained impact from any other prevention interventions that we know. I do believe that Discover will be part of NHS national policy that continues to underscore this truth. Thank you very much. Jess, back to you.
Thanks so much, Peter. It's really helpful to have you draw out those insights and the wider benefits that the potential of this work kind of offers. Great. We've got a bit of time, a little bit more time than we thought, I think, which is great for some questions. Please do keep putting them in the chat. We'll try to get through as many as we can, but I think if the other panelists are in agreement, if we don't get some, we will try and send back some responses along with the chat and the link to the YouTube clip after the event. But if I can just choose some here, it's a nice selection across a range of topics, but maybe perhaps starting with the trial itself. There are a couple of questions here about neurodivergence and whether within the trial did we include or screen out neurodivergent young people, and is there any sort of, do we have any sort of insights into this group and how they responded to the intervention? June, maybe that one for you.
Well, we didn't actually attempt to screen out anybody with neurodivergent problems. It's something that the NHS England people might actually be quite interested in examining, but certainly in this trial, we didn't.
Thanks, June. So that might be one for further exploration, maybe. There's a couple more questions coming in now. One is about the proportion of young people who were self-referral within the trial. I don't know, Steve or June, do either of you want to try and answer that one?
I mean, everyone self-referred in the trial, yeah.
So it's fully self-referral. So within that, as you were saying, June and Steve, there's obviously a mixture of those who might be above what we'd call the threshold on some of those measures and some who are below. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. We have some other questions sort of more about the approach, and one from Holly is about how we might engage the wider community in the intervention. So thoughts around how we might engage parents, teachers and peers in that. Maybe Irene for that one? Are there thoughts about that?
The question about how to include wider communities and parts
Yeah,
of
so maybe engaging more with parents and teachers and peers around it.
Yeah. I think we work very closely in the model we're delivering currently, and it will continue as we help with the training others in working very closely with sixth form teachers and pastoral leads. And that creates for the young person a sense of being understood, but also planning ways to make things more easy for them, perhaps. We also work directly with parents where there are any safeguarding issues. Clearly, we would need to, but what we want also is that for young people who come forward, they know that this isn't something that their parents have to be involved with, and that's another barrier for many young people that we work with, where there may be mental health stigma issues within the family, and the parents are very reluctant for the young people to engage with psychologists or mental health professionals of any kind. So it's a bit of a balance about how do we include parents without that somehow counteracting engagement for the young person in the intervention, weighing up those two parts. But I think it's a really, really important point.
Absolutely. Thanks, Irene. Yeah, I think I think these things are very carefully considered with Discover, aren't they? And sometimes and some approaches, it's really important to have that engagement, and other times it's helpful to let young people have their space. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, some questions also about sort of possible future directions or applications. So one here about how HEIs can access Discover training to include in their EMHP training program. So this is work in development. I don't know if this is something, Jenny, that you want to say something about, or Peter might also have thoughts.
Peter, you might want to pick this one up. It's certainly something we've been talking about a lot in terms of preparing for the implementation and how do we start embedding this into curriculum. We recognise that there's a time sequencing around that. Peter, do you want to share a bit more on that?
This is really, as I said, we've got a platform here for implementation, because now I think almost 50% of children are served by mental health support teams in England, at least. Mental health support teams have educational mental health practitioners working in them who have, like in NHS talking therapies for anxiety and depression, a standard training. And that standard training can be, believe it or not, modified to include newly emerging evidence-based interventions.
So there's questions about, teams who've already been involved in the intervention, when might they be able to use it again? And is there any funding for the training, or do individuals need to purchase it? I think there's probably a mixed answer to that. I don't know, June, if you want to take that one.
I mean, it's really lovely that so many people are enthusiastic about this. And I know there's been some questions about the teams that were trained in the BESST trial, and how they might take this forward. It might be that we'll come back to you in this next implementation trial, because we are approaching 3 of the 4 sites, and we're wanting to assess how the teams might be delivering Discover in those sites. We'll obviously also be going up to the scale sites. So if you're part of the 3 site/regions, we'll come back to you. In terms of the training through the universities, again, we'll need to come back to you in more detail. We've only just heard that we've been promised the money for the implementation proposal. So we're going to have to sit down and actually just think about this in a bit more detail. But it's exciting time. So one of my slides at the end is just about asking you to keep in touch with us so that we can keep you informed, because there's a lot happening over the next few months and years.
Thanks, June. Yeah, it's exciting to know we've got the opportunity for these things to keep moving forwards. Peter, I can see you've got your hand up there.
Just really to say that the way that the NHS can put this forward is on a train the trainer model. that really the AGIs that are currently training educational mental health practitioners need to be equipped to train their students now and for the future to make sure that this approach is really embedded within the culture of children and young people's mental health services.
Peter. I can see we've had a few more questions that are more sort of practical questions about how we did things within the trial. So we've probably got time for a couple more of those. One, maybe Steve, this is one for you. The question is, what was the route to schools? So did we engage with senior leadership teams or via EMHPs?
It was largely through the MHSTs. So we had a grand plan at the start to reach out to loads of schools. We soon learned that the MHSTs that we were involving in the trial would only be able to deliver in the schools that they were currently serving. And so we then kind of went through those teams to get an introduction to the schools mostly, and then went in kind of via that route. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Steve. There's also a couple of questions there around what the control group provision looked like. So what was the sort of offer, or how did we conceive of that control group? Do you want to say a bit about that?
I mean, the control group received their usual school care, and they received a signposting document that had online and local support that they could reach out to independently if they wanted to. I will put a link to the Lancet paper in the chat, so that in the supplementary materials of that paper, we do have a table that summarizes the type of support that was offered across schools in each of the different arms, that will give a better idea of what usual care generally consisted of.
That'd be really helpful. Thanks, Steve. I think we are out of time for any more questions. I can see there's still quite a few we haven't covered off. So yes, just we will try and answer those and send them back along with the chat and the link to the YouTube video. But I just want to hand on to June to wrap us up.
So thank you, Jess, for chairing this webinar so beautifully and keeping us all to time. So this slide is very much about asking you to just keep in touch. We will be wanting to reach out to you in terms of the implementation project and reaching out to the previous sites that were involved, as well as new sites. So please keep in touch with us. What I wanted to do was really just thank everybody. So thank you very much for coming to this webinar. We've been very excited about this webinar and how we could actually share the information and news about our project, our BESST trial. We've also been very excited about the implementation project and how it's now going to, well, hopefully roll out across across England. We're also very excited about the 24-month results in terms of showing that Discover is sustainable. And that's really important because we just didn't want Discover to be something that just lasted for 6 months and then didn't have any effect after that. The fact that it's actually sustainable is really important. So what Peter was saying as Discover being a really important part of the programs that MHSTs can offer just fits in with that so beautifully. Can I also just thank everybody individually? Can I thank you, Irene, for taking up the inspiration of my accessible ideas and developing that into Discover so beautifully. I mean, that's just been lovely for me. Can I also thank you, Steve, for just running the trial so efficiently, so effectively. Thank you, Ben, also for the analysis and keeping us on track, especially during COVID. There was a period when we were thinking, do we need another year in which to actually recruit all the students? And you were very helpful in terms of just keeping us on track. Thank you, Sarah, for also bringing together the research and clinical aspects. That's really important to remember. And thank you, Jenny, for just helping us through the implementation proposal. We couldn't have done it without your expert knowledge on all that. And Thank you, Peter. You've been wonderful during this whole trial, both in terms of your support as well as in terms of helping us think ahead about what's going to happen next. And can I also just thank you, Jess, for chairing this webinar so beautifully, and keeping us on track and keeping us focused. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you, everybody.